Emily Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. I am watching the New York Times election prediction needle, and fuck. So this is not a politics podcast, so I'm just not going to talk about that. I've got lots of other stuff to talk about. A little bit of business before this week's show, which is a kind of an unusual one, but I think one you will enjoy if you can get past a little bit of rough audio at the beginning. First, I did get some good notes about last week's episode. Two people independently wrote in to say, hey, Shane's poem was about that joke people always tell on your birthday where they say, so you're turning 25? And I realized, they both said the same thing. So I completely believe this is a common joke. And it just made me wonder, okay, so Cameron's too young to have heard that joke, because presumably this is only a joke middle-aged people hear. And then Brian and I are both primary caregiver dads who work either from home or at schools surrounded by children. So we're just never hearing this joke. We're just never in a context where we would hear this joke. The last time I had a birthday party, I was literally turning 26. So nobody asked me if I was turning 25. But yeah, so apparently that is what the poem's about. And it makes 100% perfect sense now. It makes perfect, complete sense now. Anyway, that was one clarification. Some other people had lovely things to say in general. And then I got one very smart correction from Layla, who wrote a really thoughtful note. She did say that first, Faisal Mohyuddin, who wrote the ceasefire haiku, which I think she agreed was very bad. This was a very bad series of haiku about Palestine. But her note was that I referred to him as Palestinian in my offhand comments. We weren't really addressing the poem, but in my offhand comments, I referred to him as Palestinian. He's not Palestinian, as she said. He is of Pakistani descent. So I was completely wrong about that. Stupid mistake. Thank you, Layla, for correcting me. She also sent in a bunch of poems from and interviews with actually Palestinian poets. And I had a lot of thoughts about them, good, bad, and otherwise. And yeah, it's given me a lot to chew on. And I think I may just take some time with that on another episode. But it was a great note, really great material she sent in. So thank you, Layla. Thank you also to everybody who wrote in about the episode, whether to correct errors or not. Very, very grateful for your thoughtful listening. I was on the Drunk as a Poet on Payday podcast. Jason Gray does, the North Carolina poet, Jason Gray. Some formal poets, sometimes not. I think not always formal. But I'm calling him a North Carolina poet because he lives in North Carolina. He lives in North Carolina. I'm not wrong about that. Am I wrong about that? If he doesn't live in North Carolina, I fucking always see him in North Carolina. So I'm wondering if he's just taking the train here all the time. Anyway, lovely guy, good poet. Good podcaster. There comes some more election results. I'm not looking at him. I'm not looking at him. But I did I was on his podcast, Drunk as a Poet on Payday. He asked me questions about my book, and I did my best to divert the conversation onto more interesting topics. But it was a lot of fun talking with him. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So the body of this week's episode is a long conversation. Well, it's a fraction of a conversation, really, that I had a little bit ago, a couple months ago, with my dad. I was in Atlanta for his 70th birthday, and it was either the night of his 70th birthday or maybe the next night. We were up late doing this is as much as anything, this is an anthropological document. It will give you a sense of where I'm coming from, where this whole podcast is coming from, because it was honestly a kind of typical night when I'm in town or he's in town, which is to say we talked for 2 hours, and then around 11, This is like after dinner, just the, like, not normal conversation throughout the day, with his lovely wife, my stepmother, Marianne, or other normal human beings. This is just the very intense one-on-one conversation we have, or sometimes one-on-one when my brother's around. Just that for 2 hours. And then we started recording. And then we talked for another hour and a half after we finished recording. We talked for over 2 hours. So it was like a 5 or 6 hour conversation, kind of typical. And this was typically, a little bit careering, but also it had a sort of a focus. We had initially intended to talk about a fascinating article in the New Yorker from a ways back about Kanye West buying an architectural masterpiece by Tadeo Ando and then destroying it. So we do briefly touch on that, but I'll put a link to that in the show notes. The show notes for this took me a while, but I think they're pretty cool. I think you will like them. At least those of you who are show notes nerds will like them. Mostly we talked about principles of modern design, specifically the argument, the introductory essay at the beginning of Le Corbusier's 1923 manifesto toward an architecture. We talk about that. We talk about Le Corbusier's career, what a house is for, the problem of the house, as Le Corbusier puts it. We talk about his similarities to T.S. Eliot. We actually talk a fair amount about poetry and literature. We talk about my dad's years living and designing in the Middle East, what Goethe got wrong about architecture, and the most famous building in the world that you've never heard of. So I think you will really enjoy it. As I said, the audio is rough because even though I told him we were going to start recording, he just jumped right in before I got the mics set up. So there's a little bit of scratchiness and the audio is a little bad at the beginning, but that smooths out relatively early on. And then he wanted me to make a note to warn you, though I don't think this will actually bother any of you, that about 26 minutes in, he decided that we should be starting the podcast now. Actually, just start it now. And so there are a couple things he mentions again as if we hadn't mentioned them. He wanted to make sure we know that's not because he was being senile. It's because he was trying to accommodate his editorial vision of how the podcast should work. It's all pretty clear in context. He also was concerned that he might sound sleepy or slow. Again, yes, he'd had a few glasses of wine. Yes, he just turned 70 years old. Yes, we started recording at 11 p.m. But I don't know. I think it's like he's pretty sharp, and it's a pretty fun conversation. And we kept talking for 90 minutes after we finished recording. So I think he does just fine. But he didn't want me to put in that disclaimer. I think that's about all I will say. The second part of this conversation I'm going to put up on The Secret Show in the next day or so. That one is some of the conversation continued, but then also a long, I think, fun digression into the Michael Crichtonification of America, among other things. So for now, here's my conversation with James Haverty Smith, my father. Oh yeah, we mentioned two other things. We mentioned Daniel. Daniel's my brother who does the art for SLEERICKETS. And then there was a slight confusion about the Tesla Cybertruck. We did see a Tesla Cybertruck, but it had a very convincing fake DeLorean metal logo on the back. So it appeared to be advertising itself as a DeLorean, and there was no Tesla logo. So we were fooled for the time being. That's what we were talking about early on. I think that's all I got to say. So again, not looking at what just refreshed on the New York Times front page, but here is my conversation with James Haverty Smith, my father.
Why talk about this guy, on your thing? Why talk about this guy? I don't know.
Yes. I have a thought.
So what if nobody's heard of him? I mean, to me, it's kind of interesting.
Well, I think it's definitely interesting. It's he says architecture or revolution. So this is Le Corbusier's book Toward an Architecture. Put this to your shirt.
But do before you start this, what are we trying to get at? Like, how is it? I think it might be interesting to talk about it as well. I don't know.
I don't know for sure every part of what is worthwhile or interesting talking about this, but he was unsatisfied with the state of architecture at the time. He's, pretty ferocious terms, and he is calling for a complete revamp, like a total, not that all architecture previous to 1923 or whenever it was that he published this was bad, but that architecture at the moment was being thought about in the wrong way. And I don't know that that's entirely true, but I at least can sympathize with some of that impulse. Some of the questions he asks about architecture, or the statements he makes about architecture, seem potentially applicable to poetry in a way that I don't quite know what to think about, right? Like, for good and for ill. So, like, he says that he contrasts airplane design with housing design. Like, you mentioned that there's a moment in this book where you see a photo of a modern house. Here's a modern house, and you see a photo of a Model T, which is a modern car, and the house still looks quite modern today, and the car obviously looks antique to us. But I'm not sure if that's because the house is so modern. I think it might be because architecture is still a little more conventional in its thing. I mean, maybe necessarily so. It may be that there are, like, cars, I don't know if the difference between a car in 1924 and a car in, 2024, I don't know if that difference will be as big as the difference between a car today and a car 100 years from now. Cars may be topping out and they're,
Well, I mean, if you look at very contemporary architects, not actually no longer all that contemporary, but if you look at Frank Gehry, who did the museum in Bilbao, Spain, he was modeling it abstractly on the shipyards, which is why it's quite brilliant. It's a series of very curved, almost a jumble of forms that are all thrown together, kind of like a jambalaya almost of forms out of titanium that look nothing like the early buildings that Le Corbusier did. If you look at Zaha Hadid, who's actually passed away about 5 or 6 years ago, 7 years ago, her forms are very fluid and very curvy. They certainly resemble automobiles today. Calatrava did all these very curved buildings that look like spaceships, look like modern, some modern automobiles today. You have some new cars, like there's the new, is it the DeLorean?
Well, we thought it was a Cybertruck, but we saw one in the parking lot. It was I think it said DeLorean on the back.
You said DeLorean. I thought it was a Elon Musk.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Truck, but it was like very squared up and
with an opaque rear back window.
and again, kind of polished metal.
Yeah. But like low, it's like a low polish. It's a funny,
low polish, satin kind of is very mean looking building. You couldn't tell where the windows were. It looked like a tank from the Empire.
It looks like the car that corresponds to those Boston Dynamics dogs.
Yes.
Like that. Those be accompanying it as they mowed down civilians in the streets.
Exactly. It's not a kinder, friendly looking building. Whereas Zaha's buildings, which were kind of, had a lot of curves and, building, you'd see the little kids, riding their skateboards on it. And, it was much more friendly. It happened to be honoring it's in Azerbaijan, which is, so it's in Baku, Azerbaijan. We saw it. It's very cool. And the kids love it and all of that. It is honoring Haydek, I think.
I don't remember, but yeah.
But he's pretty much a tyrant dictator, commissioning this building to honor him and his family. So it's, there's a lot of that is interesting. There's a lot of architecture that has been commissioned by tyrants.
Well, I mean, that's like the pyramids, for example.
The pyramids, most of Rome.
Yeah,
we
of course.
all love Rome, but Pope Sixtus basically
continental Europe,
plowed it up,
right?
To honor God. But he got credit for it.
Yeah. And to his credit, he sometimes took ancient objects and just plopped a cross on top, and claimed them as Christian, which is actually like a nice thing to do, because it preserves
the obelisk and
like we'll just pop a cross on top and call it.
Oh yeah. So very very some of the best architecture has been
in the service
inspired by tyranny, and some of the worst is done under quote democratic. It's democratic architecture it can be really deadly. So we're but that's an aside.
Here's a very dumb theory on why the Model T may look so much more antique than the modern house of 1924 or whenever it was. My dumb theory is houses last longer than cars. So if cars lasted as long as houses, we would have more much older cars still driving around today.
Well, wait a minute now. Today, cars last longer than houses.
Well, maybe the same comparison will look different 100 years from now.
Maybe not houses, but they last longer than housing.
Sure. Yeah. Our buildings have gotten more and more flimsy and
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's true.
But like the house of 1924 is going to have a much longer lifespan than the car of 1924.
That being said, most of those buildings, if they're done by really famous people, there's all kinds of work to keep them propped up.
Right.
They were built. The building standards have improved dramatically. So the buildings they all leaked. The type of windows they've had to. There's all these kind of horror stories of homes, wonderful homes.
I know, like Haverty had like flat buildings that would just take on water because you couldn't.
Yeah, but we all have flat buildings. You don't want to have a flat roof. Well, is that true? Because the thing about Le Corbusier is that the premises that came out of his book, and are built into his houses, set the guidelines for how we now design our cities and design the buildings within our cities. He's had more of an impact. He's had this amazing impact on the nature of particularly corporate or commercial office buildings or just buildings in general. So flat roofs work if they're done well.
Sure, yeah.
People have terraces on top of roofs.
Yeah.
That did not, prior to Le Corbusier, you had a roof with an attic,
right.
And then you had a basement. You still have homes. You still have houses like this. It's not like that they all went away, but the office building, the classic office building, adheres to he had 5 principles, elevate the building, create a garden under the building, or allow that's where you put your cars, you park your cars.
Yeah.
So you elevate the building, park underneath. What's interesting about what Le Corbusier did, which incidentally wasn't his name, he took that as an adopted name.
And then what people called him was Corbu.
Corbu, right? Which was crow.
Okay.
Was the crow.
Yeah. All right.
But Le Corbusier, which may be the crow too. I mean, I don't know. He was.
Sure. Yeah.
He took on a
nom
de plume or nom de.
He was what we would call an art monster.
Art monster. Yeah. That's a good one.
That often refers to has more to do with like your personal relationships, but it's sort of like art is everything in your life,
Yeah, he was. I will say this though. He was as an artist. He was much less. He lived a fairly normal lifestyle. I mean, he married his wife at a relatively young age. He didn't divorce. They stayed together. He actually had to, go for commissions. And when when he didn't have any work, he wrote a lot.
Yeah.
And he painted and stuff, but he painted in the nude, by the way, which is kind of interesting. But you know, but not in
well,
public.
like William Blake, right?
Yeah, not in public. So
Sure. Well, yeah, William Blake was a nudist in the privacy of his garden.
In the
yeah.
privacy of his garden, there happened to be a few pictures
Sure.
that have drifted out, but
Right,
that's okay. You know, he considered himself kind of a revolutionary. You know, he tried to work with the Soviet Union. That didn't really pan out.
Yeah,
you know, I
can see that getting a little
I don't think he
restrictive.
really worked with the Nazis, but you know, I can't say he wouldn't have.
I mean, they were willing to like dynamite city blocks for an architectural, you know, the purity of an architectural vision.
But they didn't like his architecture, and he didn't like. So he moved on. He you know, Albert Speer, you know, locked on to that. But you know, for someone who has changed the nature of how we of our cities and our office buildings, the parking garage, the rooftop terraces, glass windows.
What do you mean glass windows?
Well, he would make glass. All windows are glass. Excuse me, glass buildings.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know, in other words, he pushed the ribbon window, which is the window is horizontal. It can wrap around the whole building.
Oh, okay.
And you free up the exterior because it's just a skin, and the structure is separate from the skin. So the building can just be all glass or be wrapped in ribbon windows of glass.
But the like the shifting and the settling that'll happen with a building is kept separate from the glass.
Yeah. The exterior building,
especially with a tall building, is going to move
is
a little
not
bit.
Structural.
Right. Okay.
The exterior is a skin that shrouds a steel frame.
Okay.
Or in his case, concrete frame. He did a lot of concrete slabs, and then the walls inside. He called it the free plan. The walls inside can maneuver around, curve around, and bend around
because they're not load bearing
of the structure, which would be a grid of columns. So he pushed that with homes, but it also translated very well to office buildings. So his vision of what of the home really worked well for larger structures and office buildings.
I mean, it seems like even just looking at the landscape of architecture, whatever criticisms you have, like in America, it does seem like pretty consistently homes are way more conventional, traditional than commercial buildings. Like,
yeah.
And I'm curious, like there are some, I can guess at some intuitive reasons for that, but that's got to be a pretty familiar phenomenon to you. Like, what is going on with that?
Well, that's really interesting. I've wondered about that. I live in a mid-century modern home,
and you've designed some very modern, as well as some more conventional, traditional ones.
And the homes in the 50s, the 30s, 40s, and 50s were very modern, and then we kind of,
we got a little,
we got a little homesick and wanted to go back to old homes that had, windows with lots of mullions and muttons built in, or smaller windows, or
what is the slats, like a stand, like the house we live in, like a standard American, what do you call those? It looks like flat pieces of wood laid across the side of the house that gives it that ridge.
Oh, you're talking about just the siding?
Yeah, the side, but that is like the siding on our
siding.
Yeah, on our house, it looks like, theoretically it's like stacked wood flapped over, but like that's a concrete skin shaped like that. So we even have
that's you're calling that Hardy. That's called Hardy board.
Sure.
And well, okay, it makes sense, and that wood's going to rot and deteriorate.
Sure. Yeah.
So you take the overlapping lapping of the panels, if they're horizontal siding, actually makes sense.
Okay. For houses more than they would for a commercial building?
It could work for a commercial building too, but it would be.
But it's not there on our house because of because of its like pure ergonomic virtue, right? It's there because it's how people like houses to look.
Well, yeah, but it also is the least expensive way to do a house.
More so than just if it were flat concrete, like whatever the substance is, which is
flat like precast panels,
Yeah,
large
yeah.
if you did an office building, a tall building, the labor to put in lap siding or horizontal siding or vertical
yeah.
home, it becomes it actually becomes more economical because there's economy and scale in doing bigger panels.
Yeah. But is it what I have assumed, because there are a handful of like very modern looking, very kind of squared off, often flat roofs, often like a smooth we talked about the Tadeo house where these sort of velvety concrete, poured concrete with the little dimples in it. There are some houses like that in the area. My assumption when I see those is that is way more expensive.
Yeah, it is.
But is that because it's not mass produced in the way that our houses were all mass produced, or is it because
the materials aren't mass produced? The materials themselves are not mass produced. There's not the labor.
Yeah.
The labor force is to work on the scale of a house,
right?
A small house is
but
not.
But if that were how all the houses in our neighborhood were made, like all the houses in our neighborhood are basically 4 or 5 variations on a theme.
Yep.
Kind of tacking the same pieces and the same shapes all and flipping it sideways, over.
Yeah.
But they're basically all the same house, more or less. Is it because they're just doing the same thing over and over again? That if they were doing that concrete modern house, if that were the model for every house in the neighborhood, would the expense
come down?
Would the difference be? Would it is it purely more economical, or is it more economical because of the convention to do the houses the way ours are?
I think it's both.
Okay.
If you go to Mexico, like for instance, we visited our friends and we're kind of getting off, but it's an interesting point. If you go to Mexico, for instance, or you go, our friends, they're much more. The culture has embraced a modern approach towards architecture that looks more contemporary. Looks more modern,
sure.
But that modern looks a lot like the modern that was done in the 20s and 30s.
Sure, yeah.
And they've the construction industry accommodates that. So you'll see to have a little, and also wood wouldn't hold up. Wouldn't hold up as well.
So but it is, there are systems in place because that is the thing. And he makes the point in Toward an Architecture that we need to start getting this mass produced. We need to figure out a way to do this repeatably, consistently, reliably, and specifically for working class families is what he's aiming at. He says that in his
So what's happened is it hasn't worked for working class families. It's worked for office buildings because the economy of scale of an office building, and that's where the real money is. I mean, as an architect, I worked in a larger firm. We didn't do houses. We just didn't do them.
Yeah.
They're fun.
Right. You've done them independently.
I did it kind of on the side. I worked on my own here. That's pretty normal. You might do that, but there's
you would not hire a big firm to do that.
No, it isn't worth it. And the same's true in the construction industry. Contractors, you have contractors that work on homes, and the scale is the scale of their office, whatever. It's just smaller.
Yeah.
When you and they would love to amp up, and do bigger projects. So it really is kind of an economy of scale.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, what's kind of brilliant about Le Corbusier is that it didn't work at the most rudimentary level, but it worked at a bigger scale.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think what is interesting is
When you could have one individual company making a decision rather than having an individual household make a decision.
and what is sad is that if you could take his principles and apply them to low income housing, it would work.
Right. Yeah. Like
It would
yeah,
work. And it,
Which I mean, and he to some extent he invented what we think of as like tower projects, but they were there was a lot of distortion, and a lot of misapplication of his
that's
plan.
Sort of
but
a distortion in a way. I mean,
But I mean, like that
that's the negative side.
scale of project is
Yeah.
something that theoretically you could use this on.
Yeah, that's true. And it if you want to talk about the dark side, that's the dark side.
Yeah.
I do think on a smaller scale, even homes that are even apartment complexes that are made out of it's weird. They're made out of wood frame. You'll see these apartment complexes, and they're like wood frame, stick frame structures that just light a match and those things would go up. With styrofoam.
Yeah.
The insulation is mastic glued to the exterior
Feels like
with a thin veneer of like IFAS or whatever. IFAS being basically it's a thin coat of stucco glued to insulation that's flammable as hell.
Yeah. I mean, I suspect that's our whole neighborhood is basically that.
No, not too bad, because you do have a hardy board kind of exterior, which is kind of like a composite concrete fiber.
Yeah,
kind of
yeah. I
exterior.
remember reading about it at the time we bought it, and it's
actually
much more sturdy skin at least than I would have thought.
Yeah, no, it's not. I don't. I'm fine with that. But where
so this, I mean,
a little bit.
I truly only read the argument to this book, Toward an Architecture, which again, it came out in 1923, made a big splash. But just in the argument, which does read a little bit like a series of, like, it reads a little bit like the Tao Te Ching. Like there's like parts of it like, well, what are you? Here, would you hand it to me? Because it's some of it. I mean, I found very.
Why don't you start off by helping
insightful.
to just say what this is? Read
Yeah.
top
Okay,
of
so
that.
this is the copy on the back of the jacket copy for Le Corbusier's Toward an Architecture. Few books of the 20th century drew as much attention as Le Corbusier's Vers une Architecture, 1923, published in English as Towards a New Architecture. And you talked about the insertion of that new, which is not in his original title.
No, not at all.
Its provocative slogans and striking juxtapositions of temples with machines inspired architects to design housing that met the demands of modern life. This new translation preserves the design and compelling voice of the original, a revealing introduction including exciting discoveries regarding Le Corbusier's manipulation of images, explains how the renowned architect assembled his essay, and illuminates the reception of his impassioned views. This is a sort of a manifesto but it's pictures as well as words. So I just read the argument, the kind of the initial his introduction to the second edition, and then the argument. Our eyes are made for seeing forms in light. Primary forms are beautiful forms because they are clearly legible. The architects of today no longer make simple forms. So I mean that's one of the, I think, more immediately accessible statements he makes. The one that stood out to me maybe most just on this reading was about housing. He says the airplane is a product of high selection. The lesson of the airplane is in the logic that governed the statement of the problem and its realization. Like, how do we get a big machine full of people up off the ground in a consistent, reliable fashion to fly long distances, carrying enough fuel to fly those long distances, and then land safely, right? And the airplane is basically a set of solutions to those specific problems. And he says the problem of the house has not been posed. Like, what is the problem that the house is solving? We haven't asked that question properly, and so we're not bothering to answer it with our designs. Current architectural things do not answer to our needs, yet there are standards for the dwelling. The mechanical carries with it the economic factor that selects. The house is a machine for living in. And he makes the point that in the past, the palace might have been kind of the the central focus of architectural theory. He is making an argument that the center of modern architecture should be the house. The individual house should be that should be where we focus our concern. I'm really interested in that question of what is the problem? What is the question that the house is answering? What is the problem that it's solving? And I'm very interested in asking the same kind of questions about poetry, because I wonder if some of his complaints, which is we do things in our housing design because that's just what we do in housing design, and if I'm building a house, it better look like a house, so it better have these things on it, versus what is it I'm trying to actually accomplish with this thing? And how can I make design choices that will help me pursue that goal? So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I think that's what you just said is where this whole thing starts. I think you need to take whatever we've said before. And key it to that. If we're talking about what is a house, well, a house, I think the part of it Le Corbusier doesn't address in terms of what is it that you're trying to address with a house is the aspect of home.
Right.
And I think that's where his argument falls apart.
Right.
Somewhat. And that's the poetic side of what is a house.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's more than just it's more than just a hotel room.
In fact, a house has nothing to do. In some ways, I feel like the modern American individual,
Yeah.
sees their car, his in
His
some
home.
ways displaced the home.
Yeah.
That's where you go. I mean, and the car commercials have tapped into this huge.
Oh yeah, they're very emotional.
They're very emotional, and you tap into that car, and that's where you find meditation, solace. The moment in a movie, you're in the car and you can sing your song, and that's where you're,
you become yourself.
You become yourself in your car, listening to the song and repeating the song that you grew up with that was like captured that soul when you were a senior in college or high school, and you whatever it was that, and you sit there and you stick your hand out the window and you do your little hand wave in or the dog sitting out there, whatever. The car is has much more of the sense of return to the lost, the forbidden garden that we were all cast out of when Adam and Eve sinned, and we all are harking back to the lost paradise. We want to recapture paradise. Where are we going to find that? In the Lincoln with Matthew McConaughey, or who's the guy that goes around singing, in the car with all the
he's like a late night host who does the car karaoke. British guy.
Yeah, car karaoke.
Carpool karaoke.
I mean, every damn movie does this stuff. So is it the car? The car, and Le Corbusier puts the car. The Model T back then was like, this is really hot, and we want our house to be as hot as that. And we talked about that earlier, that the car looks awfully dated, but the house looks pretty damn cool. But so what is that? That means that what's missing, the missing ingredient is that sex appeal, and that loss of that yearning for return to the
return though. It's like
return. It's nostalgia.
It's like the house is the home is the thing you come back to.
Nostalgia is the means homesickness.
Of course.
That's where they came up with the term. It's some German thing. Some German in the medieval times was dying, and they said, well, we're going to take you back home, and he got well. So it's this whatever. There's some long story about that. But we've been harking to return to our, return to the womb, return back to the garden, return back to the womb, and that's what a home, that's what a house is, more than just a machine to live in.
Yeah.
Le Corbusier knew that. He's full of all these sort of like
he's being a provocateur.
He's a provocateur. I mean, he talks about, throw out the past, and he says, but what brought him into architecture was like he traveled when he was 18 or 19 to the east and discovered, the ruins at Parthenon.
Yeah, I mean, the Parthenon is name checked in the argument.
Oh yeah, I mean, and he just said, okay, this is amazing. I mean, he saw it as an organic work of architecture.
Yeah.
So he loved Rome. He loves Roman ruins. He would talk about, let's strip away all the excess, all the gild and all the filigree, and return to the essence, the chassis, he called it. Rome is like a remarkable chassis. So he would use that analogy. So yeah, I mean, but he had these basic principles, these 5 principles, and I will not be able to name them all, but basically, 1, elevate the roof, elevate the building, so that you can place the garden or parking under the building.
Which is why you do have a lot of buildings that are kind of on stilts.
They're all on stilts. And then you remove the basement, elevate the building, put the garden on the roof. So you have a rooftop terrace garden, flat roof. You don't have to have a gabled roof. You can't sit up there or occupy that.
Right.
You have the structure is separated from the exterior walls with strip windows, as he called them. Basically windows that could wrap the entire exterior so that you could, bring in as much glass and light into the building. Remove the walls. The walls were not load-bearing walls, so that they could adjust and create a free plan so that the walls could move off away from the exterior and be as fluid as possible.
Yeah. He says the line at the.
So there's there's 5. I don't know which one I'm missing now, but those are. And if you think of any office building, that's exactly what you've got. So
he says contour modulation is the touchstone of the architect. Contour modulation is free of all constraint. It is no longer a question of routine, nor of traditions, nor of construction methods, nor of adaptation to utilitarian needs. Contour modulation is a pure creation of the mind. It calls for the plastic artist. And that's what I was thinking. You mentioned Zaha Hadid and Calatrava. Like some of their kind of like fanciful shapes that seem like they defy structural requirements.
But the interesting
presumably they're actually very sophisticated structures.
Well,
but
I was going to say Calatrava was and is a structural engineer.
Oh, wow, okay.
And an architect.
Yeah.
So his forms are structural. His forms are the structure.
So Hadid is more playful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hadid is probably closer to Le Corbusier in that he had free forms that would kind of flow around. And so we're talking about Zaha Hadid, who was died probably within the last decade. And was a remarkable female architect. For one, she was an Iraqi, came from a Muslim family, and sort of to rise up and become and do what she did was pretty remarkable. But brilliant, and
just very distinctive, like recognizable,
very distinctive
style.
and distinctive, and yet very varied at the same time. So you see some of her buildings are very, very harsh and angled and skewed. Some of them are very fluid. Like someone said, oh, well, you're doing architecture kind of like this very, very feminine because it's got all these curves.
Right, which is a good way to provoke her to do something very different than that.
She hated that.
I'm sure,
She did not like that.
Yeah.
So, no, I'm not doing feminine architecture. I'm doing architecture. So,
right,
But,
But that, like that, the the principle you're identifying, which is separate the skin of the building from the structural, the skeleton of the building, so that it's free to either be like a ribbon window, or it's free to have
all glass.
It can have whatever kind of shape or form you want it to have. I was very interested in the example you brought up, because he published this in 1923, and you said, and this was relatively early in his
very early
career, yeah. But
he's trying to make it. He's trying to make a name.
Of course, yeah. He's doing in some ways what Eliot did around the same time, kind of saying like, everything that you're doing is wrong. You're thinking about this all wrong. Somebody needs to do it a new way. Somebody, in fact, like me.
And we got to throw out history, but not really. I'm not going to throw out history. I'm hanging on to history. He hung on to history, but the rest of you, y'all just need to have eyes that see, as he said.
Yeah,
eyes that do not see, but mine do.
Which is, it's a striking refrain. I other than just being a dismissal of those who don't get him, I'm not totally sure what it means, but
it means like you're not looking at something. I mean, I actually think it's a great phrase. It's the one that.
So what is it? So so tell me about it.
Okay, why do I like that? It's like, if you look at, you can see through. Okay, if you look at the average person that looks at the Parthenon, and it's got columns and it's got a gabled roof, and it's got some details. The columns are fluted, which means they're kind of like they're scooped out and stuff like that. You're like, that looks like that looks like the bank that I go to.
It has a little bit of that around
it's got a porch, portico. You have to see past.
The bad replicas on Wall Street.
The bad replicas on Wall Street. It's like, I assume with Eliot would be like, I can write a poem that's free. I can say.
You can make something in the shape of a poem relatively easily.
Yeah, and you can make the shape in the shape of a building relatively easy.
Yeah.
But you can't make it. And we used in a sort of you talk about it. It's not architecture with the capital A, or it's not.
This is something that you in architecture school would
hear that.
And what does that mean? What do people mean when they say that?
It's like, it's not a poem with a capital P. It's not poetry.
Is this like when people would say things like, this is Hallmark card writing? Is that what's meant?
Yep,
like
kind of.
It's sort of like, it's like corporate mass produced. It's not, no individual vision produced this.
Yeah, or it's cookie cutter, or it's benign. It's not. Okay, you might say it's not art. It's just somebody doing a painting. It's not
a distinction that people used to back in the day would make between like verse and poetry.
Okay,
which is like, well, you're writing in meter and rhyme, and that's fine, but this is not a poem.
It's not a poem.
You're just producing this kind of matter.
And it's an incredibly arrogant thing to say.
Yeah. You definitely are.
Well,
a
that's
jerk
not architecture.
Right? Yeah.
That's not architecture. That's not a poem. I mean, that's not, So, that being
this is
said, it probably isn't really,
yeah.
or it's not very good.
Yeah.
So,
But so eyes that do not see.
Your eyes that do not see are not seeing the essence of what it is, and why it lacks the things that make up a great work of architecture or art. It lacks a vision. It lacks. And I think there's some universal things, and maybe this is what you're trying to get at. If you're talking about poetry, what is it that makes a good poem a good poem? What is it that makes good architecture, or a good painting, or a good piece of music, a good piece of music? They all, in some way, have to be accessible. They have to be accessible.
Yeah.
In other words, you can look at it and just kind of know, there's something. Wow, there's something.
It doesn't just shut you out. It doesn't just tell you this is only for people other than you.
Exactly. So it's got to be accessible, and yet it also has a quality about it that is not readily accessible.
Well, it can't leave you exactly the same as you were. Like,
you want
if
to
it
come
has no
back to
effect on you, then it might be accessible, but it's inert. It
it's
can't be
inert.
inert.
You want to come back to it.
Yeah.
So there's aspects about it that are inaccessible,
Yeah.
and maybe forever inaccessible. That
Right.
it draws you back. It draws you back.
Mm-hmm.
You want to come back to it. There's something that you can always come back to a great poem
Yeah.
and find something that's like, oh God, it also,
It doesn't get used up.
it doesn't get consumed that way. It has some universal aspects to it. So there is a language to architecture that's universal, that crosses all cultures and all discipline. And there's certain elements to it that are sort of universal. And a poem is words, I guess, or whatever.
Yeah.
But in architecture, there's elements. You got a door, which is a threshold. It's a point of entry. You have the structure that contains it. You have some sort of suggestion of a roof, and sometimes the roof is the sky.
Right. Yeah.
But it's contained by walls so that it's defined. That roof can be a hole, but it's defined by what's around it. You have views, that are framed, or no views that are contained. So there's certain elements, and you can kind of strip it down to that, and you can kind of do the same thing, I imagine, with a poem.
Well, I mean,
to some degree,
I would be very interested in trying to focus on the. Like, okay, so there's an observation that is, I'm sure you went to art school, so you probably have a clearer way of articulating this, but what I observe with like the girls learning how to draw is that there's sort of these phases to draw, and there's virtues to both of them, but there's a phase of drawing which some people remain in their entire lives, which is, I'm going to draw a face. Okay, well, you're sitting over there, I'm going to draw your face. Well, your face, I know your face has some eyes and a nose, and it's got glasses and ears and mouth and so I'm going to make sure I include all those things in this drawing that I'm making. And then it's got, you got a head, let me draw a head. And you start drawing all the things that you know are in the subject, but the result ends up being what we might call primitive or childish. I mean, sometimes in a kind of delightful way, versus like somebody, Daniel, after he was starting art school, I just noticed that he was drawing what he saw. So it was like if he didn't see your right eye, he wasn't going to draw it. If he was drawing the outline, he was drawing the shadow, the shapes, the lines, the curves. That's what he was drawing. He wasn't bothering to think about, I better include the nose, I better include the glasses, and that's a very different effect. Maybe it's the difference between like trained. I don't know what you would call it, the trained eye, but that's a very different approach to. And I think it's easy to fall into the habit of saying like, it better have a nose, it better have it, and that can produce a certain kind of very conventional writing, design, whatever else.
Yeah.
Help me out with what I'm trying to articulate that I don't understand as well because I didn't go to art school.
Well, no, what you just said is great.
Okay.
I think you've got it.
All right.
I think, when you describe verbally what you see, and you would do the same thing in words. And you need to do the same thing when you look at a building. So what do you got to look at when you think about a building? I think context is really important, and I think that gets lost a lot. In a lot of architecture, both traditional and contemporary or modern, you have to think about the context, and the context isn't necessarily just the site and where it is. Or its orientation to, its solar orientation. All of those are very important. Those are critical. Or if it's on a hill or whatever, the site is critical. But also the context of what is it? What's the function? What's the context of why this building's there? If it's and so that begins to shape. It doesn't begin to shape. It should begin to shape how you look at how you approach the design of the building, the form, how you move through it. A building is not static. That's Goethe says said that architecture is music frozen in stone, and I like that idea.
Yeah.
What I don't like about that I think falls flat, is that music, it moves.
Yeah.
You move through, and you have a leitmotif, and you can kind of begin to hear something at the beginning, and then it continues on, and then it picks up, and you hear it again. And that's a lot like architecture.
You have to experience it in time. You can't experience it all at once.
And the sad thing is that a lot of architecture now is just, a photo in a book.
Right.
And that's not, it should be something that you're moving through. And Le Corbusier was wonderful about that, by the way. He doesn't talk about that in this book, but he whenever he designed, he would do these little vignettes of like moving through, like the way that, if you've ever seen the storyboards that like Spielberg does of his films.
Yeah.
It's very similar. He would do little quick sketches, like or like a comic book.
Yeah, he wants to think about what, because he makes the point in the argument of saying like, here, let me get it, because it's actually quite well said. Man sees architectural things with eyes that are 1.70 meters from the ground. Like, all right, so we're human beings. How is a human being actually going to experience this building?
Yeah. Le Corbusier would do what this guy named Colin Rowe would talk about. He was remarkable with what he called phenomenal transparency. That a building, there's two types of transparency according to this guy Colin Rowe.
Okay.
It's a good way to look at it. And one, literal, is like you put glass, you can see through it. That's literal.
Yeah.
And that's great, because that gives you a lot of layering. You can see through, you're in this room, but you also see the space beyond, and maybe even the space beyond that.
Right.
So it creates a sense of depth, which is, or just an opening, you can see through. Phenomenal transparency deals with memory. And so you let's say you come up to a villa or come up to this building, and you see this form, and you walk through the form like a gate or whatever, and maybe it's made out of a certain material or whatever, a color, and then later on you move through and you see that same color and that same form, and maybe it's transformed, maybe it's slightly different, but you
just as in music, right? The same motif will be slightly transformed.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like taking a leitmotif, and then it moves into from a major key to a minor key.
Right.
So your memory picks up on that.
Yeah, of course.
So as you move through a building, you have that kind of experience, and you may even have like a corridor, it may be a railing or something. It's a material that carries you through the building and helps you orient, moving through the building.
Yeah.
And so memory is really important, just like music. Right. Like you come back to it. It moves from major to minor. There's analogies to that in architecture.
Yeah.
So that's being able to when you move through a building, experience that and see that. Yeah. There's a lot of flipping in architecture. It's what they call figure ground. And
I think of the vase with the faces.
Perfect.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And it's a psychological thing, so that it's hard to...
Which is in the foreground, which is the thing you're looking on against a field, and which is the field against... Yeah.
So you'll have that kind of play a lot, potentially.
In building design.
Yeah. So you have the Greek temples are so amazing. You have this colonnade on the outside. Then you have the wall on the inside, the naos. And then sometimes you have the colonnade on the inside of that. Yeah. So you got this kind of refraction going on. You can't see it because it's all at once, but your mind kind of goes like, oh shit, this is like the inverse of that. Right. Or like you'll have the wall where the columns were is removed.
Right.
I mean, some of the coolest things when I was in Sicily, you'd see like an old Roman, an old Greek temple converted into a Christian church.
Yeah.
Then turned into a mosque.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I
so
remember seeing that in Sicily. Yeah.
You have these layers of like, there's the columns that were, now they've filled them up with. I mean, they're all sort of in some ways you'd like go, God, those are just all horrible intrusions. But architecture's about intrusion.
But that's also, I mean, what that reminds me of is like you read about like scientists corresponding up until the beginning of World War II, and it's like they hate it because it's like they all speak a common language, they all understand and have respect for each other, and suddenly their nationalities, which are these arbitrary distinctions, become impenetrable walls. And I can imagine the Greek architects, the Christian architects, the Islamic architects sort of saying like, I see what this guy's doing. Let's not just destroy all this.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could let's preserve some of this.
See what I can do with this.
Like, let's have a conversation. And you have to appease the powers that be, but it's like, they understand one another.
That's
right?
really
across time and space, or across time. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I think.
Because I think with the Christian monks who were transcribing all this old pagan poetry, they tacked some Christian structure on top of it to say, actually, this is a Christian story, but they preserve what was there.
That's really interesting. I think you're onto something. There is a sort of a I mean, you're right.
It's a way to keep it alive.
There's a conspiracy amongst architects. It's like, okay, I'll give you a great example.
Yeah.
I had dinner the other night with my Manuel.
Yeah, your longtime partner at the firm you worked
Manuel,
at.
and he said, he really appreciated getting your book. He said that was great.
That's very sweet.
So he's the one who introduced you to Paideia.
Yeah.
He was a conspirator of his own way.
Yeah.
And we were colleagues, but we're also rivals within the firm.
You were the two head designers at this firm for ages.
He won out, but
Sure,
he's good. He's great.
He won out, but your consolation prize was getting to go do these like colossal structures in the Middle East.
So, it's okay. We're deep friends. Good. He's anyway. I think the world of Manuel, but he talked about I brought it up because he mentioned it way back that there's a cortile or courtyard that was designed by Bramante, who, as he said, could be maybe the greatest classical architecture ever, ever.
Yeah.
A
courtyard by Bramante.
The perfect courtyard.
Yeah.
Perfect. There's never been a better courtyard.
Okay. All right.
It's the colonnade and how to resolve all that in the corners.
Do you remember the name of it?
Yeah, it's Santa Maria della Pace.
Okay.
Santa Maria della Pace.
Yeah.
In the heart of Rome.
Okay.
And so there's a hotel there that we both have stayed at. That's kind of, you can see down into that courtyard. So his.
But they preserved it. It's there.
Oh yeah, of course. Well, the court. They're not making a fuck with the courtyard.
Yeah.
No, but the hotel is kind of sort of adjacent, and he did all these other buildings, and a church happened to do a nice church.
Yeah.
But the courtyard is the little pièce de résistance.
Yeah.
So he one of his assignments at Georgia Tech, he had a professor. I don't know who it was, but the professor said, okay, here's your project. You need to design a roof on top of the courtyard. And Manuel basically
flunked. On top of that courtyard?
Yeah. Manuel basically flunked the class.
Because he couldn't do that.
So what he did is Manuel's he's a very fine architect. And he can draw very well. Beautiful. I'm sure I'd love to have seen it. But he did a very nice rendering of the sky. The courtyard.
This is the perfect roof.
And he showed the sky. And, done.
Yeah. This is the Eudora Welty talked about getting a packet of compositions from a teacher who said, "Oh, I had my students write the end of your story, A Worn Path, your unfinished story, A Worn Path," which is like one of her most celebrated pieces of fiction. Since you didn't bother to finish it, I had my students finish it. You can choose the best one, and then you let us know which one it is.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, that's kind of like, what was it? I loved. Speaking. Okay, your mentor. And Manuel was kind of a mentor, even though we're the same age, and a competitor and all that. But your true mentor, Jane, I loved her story about the Canterbury's Tale.
Yeah.
It's like, he didn't finish the work,
right?
Because they never returned. It's like, he finished the work.
Yeah.
Don't
She
worry
thought
about
that the journey there was, that's the story. That's it. There's no return.
Well, one of my great professor of mine was Fred Coder, who wrote this great book with Colin. I mentioned Colin Rowe earlier, who taught. He wrote it with him, and it was called Collage City. So he was kind of an urbanist, but he was.
Was this the guy who did they look like they're translucent pieces of paper, but he actually cut all of the individual colors out and pieced them together painstakingly? Was that book? There's some book I remember you talking about where it looks like it's sort of carelessly laid over pieces of translucent paper, but each individual mosaic piece is actually constructed. I don't know if that's
no idea what you're
some. I don't know. Maybe some work
that.
you mentioned to me at some point.
I like
when I was
that.
a kid.
I like that idea. No, I can't remember.
It's like those dirty the dirty boots you showed me. That's like, oh, that's actually a piece of clay somebody sculpted. It looks like some like dirty.
Yeah, I didn't. You've never seen that, but I did. You didn't.
I've seen a version of that.
Oh, okay.
In some museum.
I saw it at the Ackland Museum.
That's probably. I mean, it might have been where I saw it. I remember you telling me about it, and then I saw it years later.
Really?
Yeah.
Because that was photorealism, which was like that was a big exhibit that was pretty cutting edge. So she built this perfect set of dirty boots out of clay, and there was all these other very realistic things. That's where Chuck Close had a painting.
Yeah.
Back when he was like in his 20s, huge painting, So that was the photorealist.
But you were talking about Collage City.
Collage City is like how cities are built up over themselves. Kind of like you were talking about.
The passage in the Freud,
temple, and then you build it on top of the temple, and so, you just couldn't quite. So it becomes kind of a mosaic. Most cities, the great cities, are sort of mosaics. You got remnants, and occasionally someone comes in and then, burrows through a strip of medieval, stuff to like Baron von Haussmann in Paris. I'll just clean up this stuff, or Pope Sixtus. I want to create a alley here. I'm just going to knock out this stuff. So you have the rest of it's called urban poche. It's just like kind of solid stuff. You don't worry about it. It kind of fills in the gap, but you got these major alleys and stuff. But it's a collage. It's kind of like a mess.
The word that Alice rightly hates because poets use it way too much is palimpsest. Right.
Palimpsest was a big architectural term.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Well,
but it's too much it's become annoying because it's been said too much. But it is a little bit what you're talking about.
Well, I mean, it's this sort of it was to come up with palimpsest, it was a paradigm shift.
Oh yeah, paradigm shift is another
paradigm
one.
shift. It was it's kind of like the other term. We love to
I always want to call him Louis Kahn, but that's the architect. Who is the guy who Kuhn was the guy who came up with a paradigm shift as a concept.
Oh, Kuhn.
I think that was it.
Yeah, Kuhn, but he wasn't an architect. Yeah. What was his name?
He was a scientist, I think, because he was talking about scientific revolution.
Yeah. And we also had like semiotics and structuralism. All these. We were stealing from literary terms and y'all stole postmodern from architecture.
Oh yeah.
So we steal shit from each other.
There's actually there's a poem I should show you because I think you would maybe like it because I think the ages actually line up. By David Kirby called "Dear Derrida," about being in grad school, I think around the same time.
Derrida.
And he talks about the existentialists and the deconstructionists.
Deconstructivism was well. That's a little.
He's talking about the shift in time, like one replaces the other over time, and he talks about being in school while that's happening.
Well, deconstructivism was after I was in school, but we had pre-deconstructivism where we were studying the Russian constructivists. So you had Tatlin and all that kind of stuff.
Which I don't.
You don't know what
I don't know what that is. I've
Well,
heard the word.
Constructivists were looked like deconstructivists.
Sure. Right. I mean, I've studied parts of this stuff in grad, but
I know.
a lot of it is a blur because a lot of it ends up sounding a little the same.
Well, it is. And then, but what was big is structuralism, semiotics. We were reading de Saussure and
another name I've heard of,
Claude Levi-Strauss.
Yep.
And
I've read maybe a couple of essays.
Roland Barthes.
Yeah.
So wasn't he what it
John Barth was at Hopkins. They called the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins is called The House That Jack Built, because John Barth helped. It predates him, but he kind of built it up.
Was John? Are they any relationship? Roland Barth?
No, different spelling. But he is associated with who is the other guy? Barthelme is the other guy that Barth is associated with. But I still associate them with Roland Barthes because I associate all of that as it's all kind of honestly, it's all stuff that Jane warned me against before I went to college. She said, "You're going to encounter a lot of the stuff when you go to college. You should disregard it."
What the hell is it? I still don't know what's going on. I mean, but
I understand very little. I did recently read The Death of the Author, the Roland Barthes essay, which is an interesting argument.
The death of what?
The Death of the Author.
I probably was supposed to read. These are a lot of things that I was supposed to read, and I'm trying to read them quickly, and they're like so thick. It's like like trying to chisel through granite.
I have the same problem. Like you, I'm a very slow reader, so getting these stacks of things assigned was.
And being dyslexic, I can't even read. My granddaughter's, young youth.
You're reading Joanna's young adult book to Josie.
Yeah, I couldn't read it. Half the words I couldn't understand. This is like shit. It's a sesquipedalian beginning, as they would say. Like I said, I can't understand half the words you just said. So no, but I don't know what any of this has to do with anything. All I wanted to say about Le Corbusier is, why is this guy who has more impact on so much of buildings we inhabit in an environment that we live in, nobody knows who in the hell he is.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all heard of Picasso.
Right.
Picasso's great.
Yeah.
But he's the Picasso of the built environment.
Is that all right? How much of that is because paintings are more portable than buildings? I don't know. I mean, I wonder about that.
Well, Le Corbusier really, he was a painter.
Okay.
He was it was purism.
Right. Was he as notable a painter as he was an architect?
No.
Okay. Okay.
But he started out as a painter. He wanted to be a painter, and his professor he said, okay, his name was Jean Rey. He said, you need to go travel east. Just go.
Yeah.
And I want you to look at architecture. And he had this. There's a book that it's called Journey to the East.
Is that the book on ruins that you showed me? That there's
got
something that he did on ruins that you showed me.
It's a beautiful book, and renderings are beautiful, and it's where he discovered Greek architecture and Islamic in the mosques, Islamic mosques in Istanbul, and all of a sudden you see, when he came back, it was like he was doing these kind of like Swiss chalet kind of houses.
Yeah.
They're a little bit dorky.
Sure.
I was like, huh? Because he was,
he was Swiss,
grew
right?
up. Yeah. And he comes back and it's like, I don't need a gable. I want flat roofs. And they all look like the little Greek villas.
Right.
When I went to when I was in architectural school, that struck me back when I was in my early 20s. I went, oh, look, this is like what Le Corbusier was looking at.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple of books that have come out subsequent that he was looking at the solid forms, this sort of the contour. You were talking about talked about plastic forms. They're very solid stuff that with big holes in it,
right.
courtyards and stuff like that. Very influenced by that trip, and he that's when he decided to become an architect. That's when he.
I wonder if some of that, like some of the differences in like regional design, if you look at like a traditional Swiss chalet versus some of these Greek villas versus some of these like clay buildings in Mexico or Central America versus like some of the structures in the Middle East where you have. I wonder if like what role the old building materials, old building methods, and climate played on
huge.
Because with modern building materials, you feel like there's a little more flexibility to transpose some of those designs.
Air conditioning has changed it all.
Yeah.
There's a New York Times daily on air conditioning, how it changed everything.
As well, presumably as well as like concrete. It's like some of the structural materials allow us to do things that you just couldn't have done.
Well, but our buildings now have to a large degree have lost touch with the local climate.
Right. Yeah.
And he did not lose totally touch with that.
Even though he's transposing some Middle Eastern design into Switzerland.
But not all the. Well, yes, he was. But he would also have. He was very interested in the orientation of buildings.
Yeah.
And where the solar orientation was, right. and how the roofs would work. Some of his roofs were, but I mean, there's a reason that Gothic buildings look very different than Middle Eastern buildings.
Yeah.
Because you got
totally different kind
of
weather.
Timber structure.
Yeah.
That was converted. Timber forms that were very vertical, so that the snow could fall off the steep pitches of the roof. The forms are a Gothic structure is a timber frame structure built out of stone.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas you have the mosques and the early Christian churches that were in the Middle East are very solid, and they have shallow domes, and they're concrete or stone structures that are very reflective of the environment, both in terms of materials and the climate.
Yeah.
So it's huge. It's a huge factor. But modern buildings now, it's kind of like a building in Dubai looks like a building in Minneapolis.
Is this
that's air conditioning?
Advanced capitalism? Is this like the Chipotleification of every city in America, where you kind of
whatever
downtown kind of looks the same, and one part of the continent as it does in another.
Yeah. It's a lot of factors. The globalization. Takes on a lot.
It's a little bit of that home impulse. Like as we've become less traditional in terms of our individual geography, rather than people living in the same place, they're raising kids, they're having kids, they're grandkids, you have many generations of people living in the same city, let alone the same house.
On the compound.
Right. But even just living in the same city, like that is less and less common. I wonder if you're talking about like people using resorting to their cars for a sense of home. I wonder if that's also
but then
partly
they change their cars every couple of years.
Sure, yeah, but you go to some. I was going to say Seattle, but that's exactly the wrong city to name. You go to Houston, and you don't know anything. I was there recently. It's like if you see a Starbucks, you're like, well, I know what that is. Yeah. That's familiar.
That's branding.
I know it. Yeah. Well, it's branding, but it's also like the appeal of that branding is. It's consistent, but it's like I don't feel at sea anymore.
Yeah.
I can feel like I'm home. Like
yeah.
there was one.
That's a really good point.
One Thanksgiving I came home to Atlanta from college, and I think it was the middle or right after the divorce. And I had like a bad argument with, I forget what it was. It was like some weird circumstance, and I ended up going out with some friends at like 1 a.m. to Waffle House, and a woman opened the door when I got there, and she said, "Come on in, you're home." And it was like, it was sort of comforting as well as chilling at the same time. Like, okay, in some sense, she's not wrong.
No, you're talking about divorce. You're talking about my divorce.
Yeah, it was just some kind of awkward, year at Thanksgiving, and I had like some clash over whatever. But I'm saying, like, whatever it was a year when I had not sort of found that home comfort in the family's Thanksgiving ritual, which is where you sort of traditionally seek it. But then, she very savvily, this woman who was working at Waffle House, sort of
welcome home,
recognized what was happening, and it, clearly not just for me, but for lots of people.
Sure. No, I think you're absolutely right about that. It something that's familiar that you can come back to, a place of solace.
Yeah.
It used to be, I think there's always been a yearning for that. A lot of times it used to be the church. They talk about sanctuary.
Yeah, for sure.
Could be,
it's familiar, yeah. Like even there's part of me that's like, I don't want to go to church, but if I'm going to go to church, I'd rather be bored at a Catholic church than be bored at a Presbyterian church,
Oh my God, that's a really, you've struck a, that's, yeah. That you've struck a chord there. It's why. That's a whole nother discussion.
Sure. Yeah.
No, but so why is that a different discussion? It's a whole nother discussion that we're not going to go into, but I'll plant a seed. I think that I've come to some resolution that whatever happens after you die, which is probably nothing, and I'm okay with. I have to be okay with that. That's the first thing, is that you have to accept that there is absolutely nothing any more than when the plants here die. Right. They're still stuff, and there may be a legacy you leave behind. And that's what Manuel, we talked about it the other night at his we had a dinner, we talked about it. He said there's a Spanish proverb that when and of course it's being a little patriarchal, but it says a man, he uses the term man, but it could be anybody, has lived a full life when he has planted a tree, had a child, and written a book. And it's all about legacy.
Right,
you leave something behind. So that's what we can do. But in addition, I'm okay with the idea that if there's I'm okay with the fact that I may have created a God, or that God has been created in the same way that the Ninth Symphony exists.
Hamlet,
it exists.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
I don't care where it came from, but it exists, and it can be a remarkable thing.
Yeah.
So I'll buy that. I'll buy that. That's enough to find some anchor as you head towards the void.
There's a telling moment in that's kind of strange and beautiful in a couple directions in the 100 Years of Solitude, when I think the family is the Macondo family, I forget, but the patriarch of the family, there's some, I forget what the cause of it is, but there's some condition that has fallen on the village where everybody has begun to slowly lose their memory. And they find it harder and harder to keep track of anything in everyday life. And so
that sounds familiar.
Well, sure, yeah. But his solution, of course, is to put labels on everything. And he'll label everybody, it's like your son, grandson, wife, house, and he'll just label everything. He paints on everything.
That's right out of the Bible.
Of course, yeah. Well, and so he takes at the edge of the town. He pounds a sign into the soil at the edge of the town that he's helped found, and he paints "God exists" on the sign. Which is it's both a reminder that this is an important thing to remember, because he does genuinely believe in God, but it's also like, well, we wouldn't want the thing that we believe in to stop existing because we forget about it. Like, it's important. This is the thing we want to preserve.
That's it. That's it. That's fine. That's good enough.
Yeah.
I mean, like I believe in the Constitution.
Right. Yeah. It's an invention.
But it was man-made, written.
Yeah.
I mean, so, I believe in Mozart's Requiem, even though the part of my favorite part of the Requiem wasn't written by Mozart.
Right. Yeah.
But I think he set the tone for it.
Yeah, well, he provided an occasion for people to rise to their, rise above themselves to do.
But and I also think that he did set the tone for it.
Yeah.
So I'm good with that. I'm fine with that, and it gives me an anchor. It gives me something, and I think maybe that might have been my mom, too. She went to mass every day.
Yeah.
Now, it's tough. It is tough. Like listening to we won't go in there.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go. I don't want to upset anybody. But
So I mean, it's
no.
I was going to say that's fine. You will upset people. I mean,
we know. You know what we've had that conversation about.
Yeah. And me, mom. What I called your mom was not at all a credulous woman.
Oh my God,
she's a very sharp, critical thinker.
Hell yeah, and very creative. Very.
Oh
creative.
yeah. I mean, I was walking Ellie around looking at her paintings, and
Yeah, no, but also creative in a different. Just a little bit of a rebel of her in her time.
Yeah, refused to debut as a.
But if you met my mother, and people have talked about her, she was incredibly graceful and polite, and never, she was a kind of a Southern belle, I guess. But for her, that also meant like you protect certain people who have a fragile emotional, like you protect them from certain things, but that doesn't mean you don't consider it yourself. You don't. I mean, that was the thing she would tell me, like, don't send that stuff to Granddad. Just send it. I was sending my writing. She said, just send it directly to me. I'll read it. Forget. He doesn't need it. It'll upset him. Don't. Yeah. Well, and that
which is not to dismiss him.
Dad was. Yeah.
But he was the one who would bark my ear off over it.
Yeah. Dad had a much louder bark.
Yeah.
But Mom had the bite.
As a disciplinarian, I gathered growing up,
Yeah, you just didn't even think about misbehaving.
Yeah.
Why? I don't know. Things are now. We're going to start sounding. I'm going to sound very old.
Yeah, that's all right.
You just didn't do that kind of shit. Or there was room to kind of like, when we went and played, go play outside. Yeah. You could do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, y'all got into a lot of trouble that stayed below the radar of
setting fires, doing all that kind of stuff. It was fun.
Yeah. one of the things we kind of like about our neighborhood is the ability to allow some of that,
Go for it. Yeah. Yep. Let them do it.
All right, that was the first part of my conversation with James Haverty Smith, father of me, father of Daniel Alexander Smith, artist of SLEERICKETS. And the second part will be up on the Secret Show feed in the next day or so. So that's sleerickets.substack.com. Go check it out. It is free for the first week, and then pretty fucking cheap after that. So thank you for listening. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.